The Center for African American Poetry and Poetics, founded in 2016 by Dawn Lundy Martin and Terrence Hayes, is a creative think tank for African American and African diasporic poetry and poetics. Our mission is to highlight, promote, and share the work of Black poets and to pollinate cross-disciplinary conversation and collaboration. Our programming aims to present exciting live poetry and conversation, contextualize the meaning of that work, and archive it for future generations. The work of the center is vital at this particular time, when so many Black poets are at the forefront of contemporary American poetry. African diasporic poets are pushing the envelope on poetics and expressions of Blackness through art. Though some attention has been paid to the fact of Black poetry, there has been little discussion of what the diverse Black poetries of this particular moment mean and do. In a climate of renewed attention on racial disparities and systemic violence against Black and other people of color, the center is focused on a poetics of engagement in relation to this historic moment and with an eye toward moments to come. Since our inception, we have hosted world-renowned poets, visual artists, architects, filmmakers, and scholars, including Claudia Rankin, Fred Moten, Thaddeus Mosley, Carrie Mae Weems, Ross Gay, Carl Phillips, John Keane, LaToya Ruby Frazier, Lorna Simpson, Arthur Jaffa, Harriet Mullen, Dion Brand, and Christina Sharp. These are just a handful of the esteemed guests who have visited CAP in various capacities over the past 4 years. There are 5 MacArthur Genius Award winners among them. Our community partners are critical to our mission. Poets and writers are featured on campus and online, but they also visit, both in person and virtually, our community partners in their constituencies, often leading hands-on workshops in intimate settings in historically Black neighborhoods, such as the Hill District and Homewood. As an expansion of this work, CAP will inhabit an off-campus location in the New Granada building currently being renovated for the Hill District CEC. There, we plan to host visiting writers and artists who will be in residence in Pittsburgh over a set period of time. A part of our Dream Space residency program, these residents will work in collaboration with the community, its history, and its residents to create new work, hold open studios, exhibitions, readings, and creative workshops. One example of the range and depth of engagement with the off-campus community is our recent program, the Pittsburgh Poetry Partnership, a collaboration between us and the Black Unicorn Library and Archives Project. In spring 2020, the Pittsburgh Poetry Partnership, a semester-long community course, was taught by Justin Philip Reed, National Book Award winner and CAP Fellow, and the then Assistant Director of CAP, Lauren Russell, who was joined by 4 guest instructors. The guest instructors were all local poets and teaching artists. The semester ended with a gorgeous public reading hosted by one of our community partners, the City of Asylum. Through this engagement, we not only bridge the gap between the university and the community, but we elevate and expand the work that poetry can do. Our archival work, led by the poet and Marvel comic writer and Pitt professor Yona Harvey, who is the project director for the Cave Canem Oral History Project, gives us an opportunity to contextualize this unique moment in African American and African diasporic poetry. The blossoming of contemporary African diasporic poetry in America has been enabled by the Cave Canem Retreat for African American Poets, co-founded by poet Cornelius Eady and Pitt Professor Emeritus Toy Derricott. The Cave Canem Oral History Project aims to record oral histories from every living fellow, faculty member, and staff from Cave Canem. To be held at the University Library Archives and Special Collections, this ambitious project is ongoing and a key element in our desire to, in a broad-based way, provide an unparalleled resource for future generations.
Hello, and welcome to Culture Complex, the second event in our Black Study 2.0 series, Black Is, Black Ain't. My name is Steffan Triplett, and I'm the Interim Assistant Director for CAP. Thank you for joining us tonight for our event. We will be hearing new work from poet and journalist Jacqui Germain, photographer and filmmaker Tayarisha Poe, and culture writer and scholar Lauren Michele Jackson. It's been a difficult day, and I am grateful for you for gathering together with us tonight in the wake of yesterday's tragedy, the heinous violence that occurred in the Atlanta area that specifically targeted working-class Asian American women. CAP stands with our Asian American siblings and is committed to standing against hate against AAPI individuals. We stand with women and femmes worldwide, and we send solidarity out into the world and to anyone who may be viewing or with us in the chat. Our semester of programming, for the first time, does not only feature African diasporic voices, but is also in conversation with a range of Indigenous and displaced peoples of color. And we're intentional in building community and solidarity through creation and conversation through the Black Is, Black Ain't series. Tonight's event was conceived around culture. I was thinking about the vast pros and cons of culture, what gets named as such, stolen as such, criticized as such, upheld as such, how the idea of high and low culture have roots in phrenology and racism, how class and caste dictate who gets seen or respected, and how in biology, to culture is to maintain or create suitability for growth. In a timeline full of tweets saying Black culture is everywhere, I thought, what might our wildest imaginations of that be, both online and offline? As the months have progressed and as painful events like yesterday's remind us, culture contains much more than is on the surface. There is much more of the insidious in it. White supremacy in American history and present serves to be anti-Black, anti-Asian, anti-Indigenous. Representation as we know it has its limits. But in different ways, Jacqui, Tayarisha, and Lauren each create, make, and critique culture, and I'm going to introduce all of them at once now. Jacqui Germain is a poet, journalist, and former community organizer living and working in St. Louis, Missouri. She's the author of the chapbook When the Ghosts Come Ashore from Button Poetry, and is currently the 2021 Economic Security Project Fellow for Teen Vogue, writing about economic justice in the time of COVID-19, the fight for 15, and other important topics. Jacqui has supported and participated in labor organizing around workers' rights and living wage campaigns, and contributed to grassroots organizing during the Ferguson Uprising. Jacqui is one of my earliest favorite contemporary poets who I met when I lived in St. Louis. I think her work holds well a voice of dissent and resistance that brings with it so much clarity. When imagining what freedom might feel like, she writes, "My God, to be so satisfied you reek of it." Her work is full of humanity and dares to excavate possibilities in which people and all their selves are liberated and free. Tayarisha Poe is the writer and director of the wonderful film Selah and the Spades, and also the still photographer of The Fits, which is another gorgeous film. Tayarisha has directed episodes of The Twilight Zone and Two-Sentence Horror Stories as well. It was recently announced that she would write and direct the series adaptation of Lydia Millet's A Children's Bible. In Selah and the Spades, her storytelling is poetic in its image and desire, building out a physical, emotional, and sensory world one piece at a time. It's a story about Black teens at a boarding school, the school's factions they inherit and are a part of, and Tayarisha dares to resist tradition and expectations, ensuring that when our young Black protagonist makes a mistake, she, refreshingly, isn't punished for it. Last but not least is Lauren Michele Jackson. Lauren Michele Jackson is the writer on all things cultural appropriation, and she's extremely prolific. She's the author of White Negroes, When Cornrows Were in Vogue, and Other Thoughts on Cultural Appropriation on Beacon Press, and the forthcoming Back, An American Tale, which will be out on Amistad Press. And she's a contributing writer for The New Yorker. Her cultural writing and scholarship is always ahead of the curve, whether she's profiling Dolly Parton or Megan Thee Stallion, or writing about race and digital culture. Lauren Michele Jackson writes with a wisdom and knowingness where others fall flat. She has us look at the bigger picture and points us to look at the right questions when we're looking at the wrong ones. I love all the work that these three create, and all three of them are only at the beginning of their creative careers, so I'm especially excited to have them at CAP tonight, where we've asked them to present new and in-progress work. And I'm just so excited for what they'll continue to do in the future. I'm truly honored to have them in our presence with CAP. We'll hear from Jacqui, then Tayarisha, then Lauren, and we'll follow with a conversation that Jacqui will moderate. There will be a Q&A at the end of the event, so we invite those in the chat to use the Ask a Question function on Crowdcast if you have questions for our guests throughout as they share work and conversation. Thank you so much.
Hi, everyone. Apologies for the awkward presentation for this portion, but I'll be performing in this layout. So wanted to go ahead and kind of just intro here. First, thank you so much to Cap and to Steffan for curating this space. I'm really excited to be sharing kind of experimental work. I think of poems anyway as tiny experiments, and so this is kind of a deeper dive into what can happen when we're less interested in formal trappings, if you will. The second thing I do want to note, kind of going off of what Steffan mentioned at the top of this event, it's been, I would say it's been a day, but it's been a couple weeks, right? And I just want to voice, as someone who is very much committed to liberatory work, the long haul of that work, my liberation, Black liberation, the world that I'm fighting to build, is absolutely linked, invested in partnership with, and intrinsically connected to the freedoms of all people of color, particularly keeping in mind the kind of empire building country that we live in. For folks who are feeling some type of way, let your body feel whatever it needs to feel. Let your body feel whatever it needs to feel. So this piece borrows a phrase from L. Williams, who put together an installation in St. Louis in partnership with PSA, which is a wonderful initiative in St. Louis. The phrase is give the body its body back, and this piece is modeled sort of after Tracy Morris's "The Missus Gets Her Ass Kicked." This body is my body. This body is my body. This body, this body, this body. This body is my body. This body is my. This body is my. This body is my body. This body is my body. This body is mine. Body is mine. This body is my body. These arms, these arms, these arms and hold. Oh, oh. this body. This body is my body. Mine. This body, Do you know what I taste like? Not like that. My body tastes so sweet when I'm whole. My body tastes so sweet when I'm whole. My body tastes so sweet when I'm whole. My knees. Ooh, girl, my knees. My knees. My knees, my knees. My knees, let me know. My knees, me know. My knees, let me know. Somebody got that. My knees got jokes. My knees always brown and hurting. My knees always brown and hurting, so that's where my joy goes. My knees always brown and hurting, so that's where my joy goes. My knees got jokes. My hair got my mama. My hair got my mama hands in it. My daddy kissed my crown. Now his love stuck in there too. My body got bodies looking out for it. My body is my body. My body is my body. My body tastes so sweet when I'm whole. When I'm whole. My body tastes so sweet when I'm whole. Mine. This body. Do I look like a body to you? Do I look like a body to you yet? Okay, wait, but do I look like a body to you yet? Okay, but my body tastes so sweet when I'm my body tastes my body so sweet. My body when I'm whole. My body tastes my body so sweet. when I'm do I look like a body to you yet? This body is mine. This body is my these are my knees. My knees. My knees. My knees. My knee. Do I taste? What do I taste like? Give this body its body back. Give this body its body back. Give this body its body back. Give it my hair. My My ha 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 ha. My hair got my Give this body its body back. Give this body its body back. Give this body its body back. My body takes. My body takes. My body takes. This body is my. This body is my. Give this body its body back. 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 Give it. Give it. This body, give it. Give this body back. Give this body its body back. Give this body. Give this body, do you? Give this body, do you, do you, do you, do you, do you, do? Give this body its. Give this body its. Give this body its. Give this body its. Do you, do you, do you, do you, do you, do you, do you? Do you know? Do you know what? Give this body its body. Give this body its body. Do you know what you? Do you know what you? Give this body its body. Do you know what you owe? Do you know what you owe? Do you know what you owe us? Give this body its body back. Give this body its body. You know. Do you know what you owe us? Thank you.
Hey, hello. I'm really excited to be here, both in witness of other people's work and to share my own. So I'm gonna jump in. This is an excerpt from a story that I'm currently working on, a longer piece. That is the diary of a character named Mallory, who's in her early 20s. Okay. I'd shared a cigarette with Moses before my nap this afternoon. So when I woke up, my mouth tasted like shit and cotton, and all I wanted to do was smoke another or swear off them once again forever. All I wanted to do was go back to sleep. It was about 6 then, maybe 6:30, and I told James I'd be at Katya's before the discussion started, and she'd be annoyed if I didn't make it, since she's the one who suggested the book club in the first place. And I'd enthusiastically told her that I'd help organize and spread the word. I didn't do those things, but in my defense, the list of books that the group ended up compiling is all just a lot. But James is in her first year of law school, so anything that isn't a thick legal tome to her is pleasure. Idris was in the kitchen when I finally crawled down to drink water straight from the faucet. It was sloppy. Half the water ended up in my hair, a quarter of it up my nose. He tended to a pot of ground nut stew while I slurped. "Aren't you going to the book club?" he asked me, even though he knew full well that I was. "Yeah, man," I said. "I fucking love books." "What did you guys read this week?" Something, oppression, something, I forgot. "Why aren't you coming?" He gave me a look. Of all of us in the house, Idris is the wisest and the one with the lowest tolerance for well-intentioned white people, many of whom will be present at book club inevitably. I can take them or leave them. They're like mosquitoes buzzing around on a beautiful summer's day by the lake. You know they're there, but you go to the lake anyway. If they get too close and start gunning for your blood, which, let's be real, most tend to do, you smack them down. Otherwise, we coexist. I've known Idris since 5th grade. We went to this place all the way out in Germantown, a lifetime away from West Philly. I was new to the school then. My mom had just started teaching there, so I got in for free, and Idris was the only one to talk to me at lunchtime on that first day. This meant that the following day at lunchtime, I was ambushed by his then girlfriend and her best friend with accusations of me trying to steal her paramour. Nonsense. Anyway, His girlfriend, who told me she'd wash me out if I even looked at her man again, was James, and James, you'll come to understand, is my soulmate. So Idris wasn't going to book club. I wiped my face free of water and slathered the hand lotion we keep by the soap all over myself in a poor attempt to wake myself up, make myself presentable. Myself. Lavender used to say all I fucking talk about is myself, but Lavender's not here anymore, and this is a diary, and how am I supposed to avoid myself in the diary format? If Lavender were here, she'd ask me why I wasn't writing more about her, but I'd rather not go down that line of thought now. My phone buzzed while I ate straight from the pot of stew. Idris can cook, let me tell you. It was a notification from Petty Cash. I owed one of the Logan twins $12 for a bagel, a chai, and a honey stick. $12. This was a full 6.5 months ago, but I've been steadily refusing to pay the money back. $12. The kid is rich. Only people who don't need the $12 are this concerned with getting it back in their bank account. I'll never give him a dime, and he'll never mention it to me in person because he's a coward. But I could do without the notifications. While futzing around in the app trying to silence it, another buzz, another notification, this time a text. I almost dropped my phone. Another text came in, then another. I read them all. I don't know why she was texting me. We said we'd bury it, never speak of it, move on. My phone buzzed again and my throat closed up. Idris slapped my hand away from the ladle. Please tell me you're not eating off the spoon and dipping it back into the communal pot. It doesn't matter, I told him. I don't have germs. He threw a pot holder at my back, but it missed. I'm fast and he can't throw. Our house is this majestic old red brick, white trim, forest green painted half castle, a duplex attached to an unoccupied twin of itself that's been empty and falling apart for as long as I can remember. James's uncle once snuck us into the abandoned house next door through the attic to help pull the original copper wiring out of the walls, as it goes for a pretty penny at the scrapyard, but that's its own story. There are 7 of us on the lease. James was first because her parents owned the house, then me, her soulmate. Idris and Isaiah have been together since we graduated college 2 years back. Bobby P., who I knew from this drama summer camp we both were counselors at during school, and who's the only white girl who knows what the fuck she's talking about. Ari, who went to high school with me and James, although we didn't run in the same crowds till way after. And in the attic bedroom is Vonnie, who's rarely in town. He's a consultant, but we don't hold it against him, except for James, who says that life is too short not to hold grudges. We live together because it seems useless not to. Plus, I don't cook, I barely sleep, and my fear of my loved ones dying is too intense to live far away from them. There is one life, and I want to spend it with them so long as they'll have me. Along with this motley crew, there are 3 unofficial residents eating our food and putting strain on the plumbing. James's on-again, off-again, on-again, off-again boyfriend, Brennan, who I do adore and am always rooting for the on-again segment of their shenanigans, as Brennan never fails to pay homage to me as the best friend of his paramour. Ari's girlfriend, Carrie, spelled with an I, who is perfectly fine, and I have nothing more to say about her at all. I don't want to think about Carrie, so I won't. And rounding the house out every now and then is Zhaozha, my most chaotic counterpart. She plays bass guitar in a semi-almost sort of famous band that's always off on the college circuit. When Zhaozha's in town, I can't help myself. All decorum goes out the window, and James ends up chasing us around the city trying to save our lives from ourselves. We have fun. In our house, we suffer very few fools, only the funny ones. We take care of each other. The house, the crew, the love within it, it's all ever expanding, bigger on the inside or whatever they say. With my crew, I am forever full. To them, I am loyal. I stopped by Lucky's Chinese on the way to Katya's for a fresh egg roll. Our house is on South 48th Street, and she lives all the way over in the bougie complex across the street from UPenn, one of the ones where they stick all the grad students who are too afraid to venture farther south than 45th and farther west than Clark Park. The walk itself isn't far, but the mental gymnastics I needed to do to keep myself from talking shit at book club was bound to be exhausting, and I'd barely had any stew. Plus, it's a Thursday, and Yeshin works on Thursdays. His parents own the place. Mallory, he said to me as I waited for my egg roll, you want to go shoot this weekend? He's been teaching me with this little pea shooter that jams half the time and should probably be decommissioned. Sure, I'm a bit of an armchair pacifist, and at first I was hesitant to learn. We're in Philly after all. There's enough unnecessary dick-swinging gun violence as it is without me adding to it. But honestly, I couldn't argue with his reasoning. We're not white, and we live in the United States of America, he said one day last summer in the park. It's foolish not to know how to handle a gun. My friendship with Yashin is one of the oldest I've got. The slightly elder, curmudgeonly brother that I wasn't born with, but who treats me like his own anyways. He's made himself responsible for safely teaching me dangerous things. It's in part out of guilt, but mostly from love. When he was 8 and stupid and I was 6 and gullible, he handed me a firecracker, but didn't explain that it was already lit and that these things, once lit, tend to explode. The cracker shot up and a spark caught my quilted vest. Stop, drop, and roll, stop, drop, and roll, stop, drop, and roll, he shouted at me, shoving me down and rolling me himself. By the end of it, we both lost our eyebrows, I lost a couple braids, and his hair grew out in a mullet for months. Our parents considered that punishment enough. Nothing really bonds you together like the thrill of danger that neither of you should have survived. Yeah, I said. I could use more practice. Saturday at the cemetery? Saturday's Ari's birthday, isn't it? He asked. Fuck. Ari. Saturday is Ari's birthday. We could bring him along, said Yashin with a shrug. I bet he'd be into it as long as his girl doesn't come. Ari and Ari's girl. My throat closed up again. I coughed. Let's go Sunday. I think they've got plans already. Hey, did that guy who was asking for me ever come back in? Yashin shook his head no. Curious. You want me to text you when I see him? What was his deal again, I asked. His bike got stolen on 52nd. He suspects it's part of the larger string. Any witnesses? I said. No. Okay. Give him my card if you see him, sure. In the dead of this past winter, I made several changes to this little old life of mine. First, I quit Lavender, my girlfriend of 2.5 years, and soon after, I quit grad school. What was I studying? It doesn't matter. I'm very pro quitting things. Now I split my time between bartending at this Ethiopian place over on Locust and making a name for myself as a private investigator. James made me business cards for my birthday 2 months back. They're beautiful, truly. Baby blue with gold embossed letters and my slogan on the back. Not interested in justice, only here to ask 5 W's and an H. Justice is a sticky subject in our household. James isn't convinced it exists. I'm still working it out. My phone started buzzing again, this time a call, but I ignored it and let it ring, letting the vibration shake my right leg. All my attention was on it while I studiously avoided its existence. The egg roll was hot and delicious. On my way out, Yashin called. You want to borrow my vape pen for book club? It'll get you through it. Yes, God, please, I said. But then he said, this one's not THC, just CBD. CBD is fake, I told him, but thanks anyway. I grew up at my mom's place on Osage and my dad's place in Cobb's Creek. My grandparents are still around, both sets, and they live next door to each other in Kingsessing. Before we lucked into the house and right after college ended, James and I shared a 1-bedroom across the street from the new jail for children on the other side of Market Street in Northwest. I'm pretty sure that's when James decided justice was fake. There have been times when I've considered moving out of West Philly. Lavender, after all, lives all the way in Fishtown. It was practically a long-distance relationship. More than once, someone visits from out of town and tries to extol the virtues of this city or that. Come to New York, they tell me. That's where real art happens. Move out west, they said. The sunshine, the clean air, the earthquakes are a thrill ride. Come south to Atlanta or Charlotte or Miami. You'll love it, they swear. They always swear. I've been to those places. I've seen them, I've smelled them, I've tested out their public transit and rode my bike through their bike lanes. But I've always come back to this tiny patch of my hometown. Maybe change scares me. Maybe I just prefer the things I know I love. I like that I'm from here. I like that it's home and nobody can take that feeling from me, even as the neighborhood shifts and morphs, even when there's danger, even when this place spits in your face and knocks you down. I don't know. I love Philly. I just do. You'd love it too if you knew it like I do. The stars are bright tonight, even with the light pollution. I stopped off in Clark Park to get a light from the old guys playing bocce under the fluorescents. How can y'all even see the balls this late? I asked them. They laughed me off their court in response. I've always suspected these guys are like the ones in Rip Van Winkle, and if you linger too late, they'll trick you into a game and steal your youth. What do I know? On 42nd Street, I passed by this house filled with people who went to this one particularly insufferable small liberal arts college. Every time you walk in that place, you get lectured by some white boy who swears he's got something important to teach you about your existence. They do throw great Halloween parties, though. no expense spared, and that's when you realize how deep their pockets run. James has this one cousin who turns into a star whenever she gets too excited, a fact that she forgot to mention before I hooked up with said cousin last Halloween at this very house. I ended up chasing her to the roof before she ascended, bright hot light splitting open her chest, spilling out of her fingertips, electrifying the ends of her hair. Have you ever seen a woman turn into a celestial being while telling you to give her a call when she's back on solid ground? I almost went blind. It was worth it though, she was gorgeous. A cupid's bow on her lips so deep they almost split down the middle. How could I not kiss? Shit like that only happens to me in West Philly, and you want me to change locations? I'll move when I'm ready to live a boring existence, only then. I kicked my shoes off at the door and could smell something delicious coming from the kitchen inside. Immediately, I remembered that the book club was also a potluck. I think I mentioned before, but I don't cook. I do, however, happily eat. My mood shifted in a positive direction, but then, before I knew it, James was racing out of the living room, down the hall, grabbing my hand and yanking me into the bathroom near the front door. Inside it, white porcelain tiles reflected the light back on us, and we checked our reflections in the mirror. I like to admire my face next to James's as often as I can, because James's mother is a god, and while I tend to hold my own pretty well in the looks department, nothing makes you look better than standing next to a half god, letting their radiance radiate all over you. It's like an energy facial. Drink this, she demanded, holding out a mason jar filled with oily red wine. I smell it. Is this from a bottle or a box? Box, she says. When will we move on to bottles? When we're 25? Don't we deserve better for ourselves, I asked. Don't be bougie, she said. Some boxed wines are better than others. Drink. I chug, open-mouthed, willing it to skip my taste buds. You sure are cutting it close, Mallory. I called you twice, and I know you didn't bring the chips and guac like you said you would. What's with your phone? I was working on a case, I said. I had it on silent. Her reflection pauses and then frowns back at me. James always knows when I'm lying. She says it's because my nostrils flare just a bit whenever I do, and I told her that talking about my nostrils was racist, to which she replied, how can that be racist? I'm Black, which is fair. But I don't like being told my own tells. To be hyper aware of how my body moves through space does nothing for me. Life's too short. I prefer to remain somewhat of a mystery to myself. You were not working. Idris told me you spent the whole afternoon in bed, so what's up? Ari called you too. Ari? I said. Ari's here? You didn't tell me Ari was here. Ari didn't tell me he was coming. So, James said, yes, he's here. Shave and a haircut gets knocked out on the door outside. Just a minute, calls out James. Go outside, I yell. I've got to pee, she says, and I check my phone. I see the missed calls from James, one from Ari accompanied by a text that's just a question mark. And after that, there are a string of texts and calls from the same number over and over and over again. And it's as though my eyes stop working and my heart beats so loud that I can hear it, and it's the only thing I can hear, and my throat closes up again, and there I am in the bathroom, struggling to remember how one breathes. If Ari's here, I choke out. Did Carrie with an I come too? James washes her hands and shrugs. Surprisingly, no. Not exactly a bad thing, let's be real. That woman displays an unhealthy attachment, and I'm concerned by the codependency I'm seeing. Did you eat yet? I shake my head noncommittally side to side, and I ask, what's so wrong with codependency? But she's moved on. So the Logan twins are here. Ari, who bought edibles if you want one. Katya, obviously. Some white girl I don't know, but she seems okay. That guy Elvis is here. Polly from Law Review, who I do adore. But she brought these two white guys I don't know and don't want to. Rhea brought samosas. And Isaiah showed up with some ground nut stew from Idris, who isn't here because, well, you know. Elvis is here, I said. Fuck, that guy's easy on the eyes. This was a distraction I could latch onto. I splashed water on my face and hunted through the medicine cabinet for some moisturizer. You're back on men, I see, James said disapprovingly. Another round of knocking at the door. Simultaneously, we called out, occupied! It's a one-bathroom apartment, but my God, patience is a virtue. I'm not back on them, I said. I'm just taking a break from the softer sex. Not interested in getting the heart broken for a bit. That's why, James said, you need to stop fucking with white girls. Lavender's Italian. I thought she'd be different. At this, James guffawed. I finished the remainder of the wine quickly, some of it spilling down my chin. She wiped it off a bit rougher than necessary, perhaps. I don't discriminate when it comes to matters of the heart or the loins. All that I desire is strong hands gripping my face, palm to cheek, and squeezing me a little, and telling me everything's going to be okay, and that they'll take care of me. I don't care what their gender is. I never thought about it. I just care what their hands feel like. Warm, soft, firm. My phone buzzed. James's eyes went to it, resting on the edge of the sink. Who's the Colorado area code for? She asked. Same as the other calls, same as the texts. I grabbed my phone and shoved it in my pocket and wiped the wine off my shirt and yanked the door open. Outside the door, Ari's poised to knock again. Ari, my sweet Ari. Yo, he says. I can't believe you guys left me out there all alone with the fucking Logan twins. The evil one says you owe him petty cash. I grab his face in my hands and kiss his forehead and shove past him, rapid fire. I run down the stairs. I forgot my shoes, but I can't go back. I'm out the door, past the bikes, and then, only then, can I breathe. When Lavender dumped me and I couldn't get out of bed for 2 weeks, Ari reminded me what it meant to be alive and convinced me that it was worthwhile. How do you repay a friend like that? I take out my phone and I open the messages. All of them are from Carrie with an I. 1. Ari's going to book club. Are you going? I'm not going. 2. Question mark. 3. Are you going to say something to him? 4. Don't say anything, please. 5. Let me tell him. 6. I don't think we even need to say anything. 7. Why aren't you picking up? 8. Mallory. 9. Mallory. 10. Pick up the fucking phone. 11. I swear to God, if you tell him, he's never going to forgive you. 12. I'll tell him you tricked me into it. 13. I didn't mean that. I wouldn't say that. You know that. 14. I'm calling you. Pick up. 15. Just tell me if you're going to book club. 16. Mallory. 17. Ari's not picking up. Are you with him? 18. Please don't say anything. 19. He doesn't deserve the heartbreak and you know it. Mallory. It's James, outside now, with my shoes in hand. Oh, James, love of my life, mate to my soul. What the fuck is going on? She asked. Ari's not coming down, is he? I asked. No, I told him to stall for me. What's going on? What aren't you telling me? Nothing, I said. I insisted, really. Don't say nothing, she said. I know you're lying. I can't tell you. You tell me everything. Not this. It's fine, I said. It'll be fine. It's fine. I'm fine. I'm just feeling guilty. Well, that's a useless fucking emotion, she said. I know, I said. Either you do the things you're going to do in life or you don't do them. But make the choice and stick by it until you choose to change your mind, she said. Who's the guilt for? It's just a weight. Cut it off. I know, I said. I'm the one who told you that. I know. So why the guilt? I can't tell you. Why? If it'd been anybody else's girl, it wouldn't matter. Not really. We're young. Life is fast and flings come and go. But this is Ari. And if it'd just been one time, fine. I think the guilt is a beast that I could shrug off of my shoulders. But the first time became the second, became the third time. And by now, I've deleted Carrie with an I's number from my phone and re-added it so many times that I've got it committed to memory. I couldn't forget her if I tried. I've barely seen Ari lately. Every time I do, I want to cry. And we just keep lying to him daily, both of us. Why? It's so easy to be selfish, and I wanted to be selfish. The guilt I could do without, but the guilt is the penance. Telling James would be too close to absolution for my comfort. I can't tell you, I said. She stared me down, and after a moment, her eyes softened. Fine. Are you coming back inside? I shook my head no. Yes, she said. Yes, you are, she smiled, because you're not wandering around alone at night in this state. James, she shushed me and grabbed my hands. Whatever's going on, she said, it's not going to be solved in the next 2 hours. So you may as well eat good food and sink into the couch next to me while I wax rhapsodic and guilt some of these white people into giving reparations. So let's do the song. I don't want to do the song, I said. Shut the fuck up, she said, and do the song. I closed my eyes. The stickiness of her palms in mine was the only thing keeping me from floating away into the atmosphere and ceasing to exist. Now she started. Imagine yourself in a house, and everywhere in that house, laying all over, is the clutter of whatever's torturing you. Go around that house, pick up all that clutter one by one, check every crevice for every thought, gather that clutter in your arms. You can't do anything with it now except gather it. Hold it all. And then together we sing the stupid fucking song. Put it in a box, put a bow on the box, put the box on a shelf in your mind. And that's what I do. Because James is a half god, and I promised her I'd come to book club tonight. I open my eyes. I've been squeezing them, seeing starburst patterns against the dark. As my sight adjusts, James comes back into sharp relief. I'm hungry again, which is a good sign. Better? Asked James. Yeah, I said. It was. Holding hands still, we head back inside. At the door, she stops us, hesitating. She sighs, dramatic per usual. Listen, she said. One of these days, all those boxes we've got buried in the basement of our brains are going to topple open. You know that, right? All the shit we're avoiding, all the guilt we don't want to feel, all the hurt, all the pain, all the fears, they're going to come out. I shrug. And on that day, you know what I'm going to do? I asked her. A lot of drugs, she asked. A lot of drugs, I said. Thank you.
Okay, I think I'm on. Hi, everyone. So I first just want to thank Jacqui and Tayarisha for the work that they shared. I've been, clapping to myself. Obviously, no one can hear. I also wanted to just sort of acknowledge the day that I think we've all had and just sort of name the violence that happened for what it is, as racist, as misogynist, as an extension of the US imperialist project that is continued sort of unabated for centuries now, yet also a very contemporary meeting out of that violence. And so on the subject of US empire, I will be reading a excerpt from my next book called Back, an American Tale, which is trying to think about the sort of literal and metaphorical considerations of the back in American life and culture and in labor and just all sorts of things. It's a lot. But this selection I'll be reading is from an essay called The Negro Exhibit. And it is a work of what the scholar Saidiya Hartman would call critical fabulation, or you could just call it maybe more modestly historical fiction, depending on how well it does its job. And so it begins with a newspaper advertisement. But without further ado, I'll just start reading. A Negro Exhibit. The Negro Exhibit will be held at the Broadway Tabernacle on Tuesday, the 10th of July next. This annual exhibit is the most important anti-slavery meeting held anywhere during the year. At no moment since the commencement of the anti-slavery enterprise have the devoted zeal and earnest efforts of its advocates been more needed. The Negro Exhibit represents to the country at large the progress, the efficiency, and even the existence of the anti-slavery cause. It is, to vast numbers of people, the only sign of continued zeal and spirit of the abolitionists whose local meetings they never hear of. The American Anti-Slavery Society stands now, as it did at the beginning, the sole enemy through all the United States to the system of American chattel slavery. The cause, which gives us everything to hope for if we persevere, everything to fear if we falter, appeals loudly to abolitionists all over the land to make the ensuing Negro exhibit one that shall do more than even any previous one has done to drive the South to despair in defense of its felonious system of society, and the North to a more determined attitude than any portion of it has ever yet ventured to assume in the defense of its own rights and the assertion of the rights of the slave. A contest of nearly 20 years has proved that the only hopeful issue with slavery is the demand for the immediate and unconditional emancipation of every slave, and that such a consummation can never be attained so long as we maintain a political union with slaveholders. We hope it will be our privilege to meet with a large number of our warmest friends and most powerful advocates. Every year is a crisis in our history, and such a crisis as should secure as far as possible the attendance of all those who desire to see the weight of its influences increased and circulation of its able organ extended. Brethren and friends, by all the toils and triumphs of the past, let us resolve to be at the exhibit if we can. The meetings will be continued as usual for 3 days. The young orator had been awake for some hours, up and about well before any other individual here, he is sure. Meeting this sight of dawn is a habit he'd be rid of gladly, sown into habit during a previous life still entirely too close to his present, not that he suspects it will ever be otherwise. The residue of that life is one probable reason for the felt separation between him and the others. Another, their disparate moods. Inside the Broadway church between Worth and Catherine, Fred leans against the doorframe just past the vestibule in a readier pose than the ones who incline their bodies against the pews inside. They might be as one vibrant mass, one moving tribute to the Lord's palette in pinks, yellows, browns, tans, and grays, though he can't help but note crucial points of difference in an atmosphere but that might well be the nation, to which difference means everything. The men stand about in their austere peacockery, starched linen and somber fabrics belied by trim waistcoats and jackets flared at the hem. The women are much more severe, wholly serious in their dour day dresses in a manner Fred doesn't find unbecoming. He likes their seriousness and accepts that, for the most part, such altruism is less than pure. There is something owed to them, too, once the pesky business of slavery is put to bed. It is enough that their causes align at present. And even they, like the men, can entertain the notion that cause does not conflict with a bit of jolly, separating from their escorts in pursuit of light gossip. It is springtime, after all, or summer, rather, even if the day's weather is hardly short of dreadful, chilly as a wet sheet with dull, drizzly rain, the worst imaginable weather for a public meeting, though attendance doesn't appear affected at the least. The good folk who robustly fill the room choose to keep their caps and shawls, however. This is not the extent of unpleasantness as far as these things went or could turn into, not to Fred at least, who's known the keen sting of stone-scraped cheeks, whose hand, stiff and creaky as any neglected schooner, will never again be as it was. But Fred isn't fond of this part, the waiting. In these moments, the chance that some untoward comment might cross his path is higher than usual. And where is the contemptible Mr. Collins, comes an uncharitable thought, though he knows very well the man had blessedly lost interest in these works a long time ago. Mr. John Anderson Collins, who could count in his cap the outsized accomplishment of roping young Fred into this mess. We have here, ladies and gentlemen, a genuine graduate from the particular institution, Mr. Collins would say with too much smile, with his diploma written on his back. No great love ever passed between them, and it is with a small shudder, unaffiliated with the chilly interior, that Fred remembers one summer in Syracuse, a near humiliation. 1843, Mr. Collins, upon first failing to acquire a venue fit for airing their noble cause, saw Frederick installed at Fayette Park to Congress with twigs, squirrels, and other natural life until, miraculously, several and then many and then hundreds of persons came to hear about the nation's great dread, slavery. For his part, Mr. Collins was never all that enthused about the fate of chattel and spent his time as an agent on behalf of the fine Massachusetts Anti-Slavery Society attacking property in toto, espousing the cause of universal reform. Would that man were emancipated from ownership altogether, he proposed. My dear friend, Frederick was compelled to address the formidable Mrs. Chapman months later when weather and otter cooled some. Even so, Mrs. Chapman did not receive the complaint kindly. She chastised Fred for the trouble of superseding his ineffectual superior. That Mr. Collins was white and Fred only so by blood and not law hardly needed to be said, and so it wasn't. Shared cause lays precedent to no shortage of small indignities. At least on the stage, there is happening. On stage, momentum can be redirected, disagreement tempered, intensity disciplined by ethical promise. Violence or dissent, physical and otherwise, only emboldens the mission, proving the trajectory of their blessed course of conviction. But here, minutes short of his performance, twixt being and being for others, the inherited condition of his birth, it is maddeningly stagnant. Fred is restless. There is nothing to be done until the almighty clock face pulls the good abolitionists into the pews in earnest. Fred makes for the front, keeping tight to the sparsely furnished whitewash in an oblique route that will bring him to the pulpit by design, the building slanting its housed bodies in all due orientation to Lord and Pastor. Under his breath, he recites the incumbent speeches, kept in mind less as a string of words than an assemblage of tenor and affect. Of this too he's grown weary, never of the cause, but of its means. He yearns for a new posture. He's proven to do great damage with a pen. A wonder the venues for doing so arrive much less frequently. Fred thinks again of Collins. We will take care of the philosophy. He thinks of his mentor, his friend of sorts. Tell your story, Frederick. That mentor or friend of sorts is in attendance, being something like the mastermind behind this operation. Will, already seated, is quiet in his desire to commence, the only person Fred would entertain feeling more impatient than he. If ever the spirit of liberty could be said to animate a presence like a living thing, the servant William Lloyd Garrison would be her earthly host. Like the fires of hell funneled through the vessel of a saved man, Fred always thinks. Heretic and cold William could be, but behind steel-rimmed spectacles awaits some secreted warmth. He cannot compromise to save a life, and wearying as it can be, maintaining a relationship with the man, William's company bathes Fred in more reassurance than he'd like to credit. Their first meeting felt ordained. He, Fred, trembling like a branch in the aftermath of the furious storm that was his most prominent speech to date, a dreadful speech, if speech it could be called, all stutters and half-stops, when the man whose editorial had filled his body like a breath since the first months of freedom found him. William followed him, took him in hand, or under wing, as it were, their union thereby forged. Each man saw the other and sighed himself, to which their years of friendship was a testament, but their bond was also their breaking. After Fred sailed across the Atlantic and back, their relations were altered, a change in the winds no longer denied by their respective followers, who can no longer be said to maintain fidelity to each other. Though the magnitude of the loss turns Fred's stomach, he will not be cowed by another man's passions, nor his own. There is some trouble regarding the speaking order. William has apparently been slated to provide something more meaningful to the two-story crowd than the brief call to order for which he had planned. The severity of his scowl eases somewhat as Fred approaches, out of relief, perhaps, that another party may share in the annoyance with the unanticipated run of show. But Fred can only muster so much irritation. He is sure the elder speaker will think of something. He doesn't say this, only offers a sound as between a hum and a grunt. Anything more robust, whether perceived as affirmation or disregard, might send the man to going, off into a premature sermon lengthy enough to upset the schedule even further than two ill-prepared speakers. For there seems to be some confusion too on behalf of Mr. Parker Pillsbury. Fred, however, knows exactly what he must do and who he must be in this moment. The people in the pews before them are more than familiar with his story, have held it in their hand, and likelier than not heard it from his lips at least enough time to usurp his place and play the fugitive to broad acclaim. This is more than mere theory on his part. How many times has he rounded a corner, emerging from the shadows like some northern parlor's native swamp thing, only to hear a society man's thin tenor pulled down to the depths of the standard darky dialect in a retelling of where he, Fred, had been and what he, Fred, had lived through. He is sure William will think of something, and William does. Not long after half past the hour, the president rises, drawing every countenance to his person. In good cause, the benediction of God might confidently and successfully be supplicated, he begins. There can be no doubt that ours is such a cause. It is the best of causes, the cause for the promotion of universal liberty, and we are sure, therefore, that the smiles of God are upon it. The room applauds. The end. Or the end for now.
That was so great. Thank you both so much for that. I feel like I've been looking forward to this because I've been wanting to hear work from both of you guys. So that was very much a treat. So I appreciate you guys sharing. I guess to kind of start off, when I'm thinking of this year's CAP series, the title being Black is Black Ain't, right? And thinking about culture that way, to me, I think of culture as, depending on what culture you are part of, for the sake of this conversation, we'll say Black culture, right? Black culture in the United States, right? Which is already a very complicated generalization to make. But I think of culture as kind of a practice and recognition, right? And so what I was really thinking a lot about coming into this conversation is this process of culture being a way for people to recognize each other or recognize portions of themselves in each other. So I'd love to kind of hear, we're going to go with like an icebreaker-ish question. If you had a mirror in front of you that was a bunch of cultural artifacts that you most related to, what are the things that are most visceral for you, right? Is it the food? Is it the music? You know what I mean? Like, what are some of the parts of how you relate to culture that are the clearest that you can see in your mirror?
Okay, that's a good question. I like that. I think I know something because this is something I've been thinking about recently. Like, how do I how do I see myself in other Black people when I meet them? Which is a weird way to state what you just said so eloquently. But I think for me, it's something to do with language, and obviously all Black people don't sound the same or talk the same or use the same slang or words or grammar or whatever.
Right.
But it has been so disorienting to be indoors most of this past year and see what I've always thought of as like a Black way of speaking be co-opted by brands and by other people, and to learn about this like digital blackface thing that I don't like that people talk about on Twitter and online and in online spaces. And I think the reason that that's so jarring is because for me, there's just something so beautiful and natural about hearing different types of Black people talking to each other and hearing the ways our language coincides or our language like crosses over with each other and the ways that it differs. But it always feels to me like recognizably Black, even if it like, I don't even know what that means. It's just like something that I feel. And so to see and hear those recognizably Black language conventions be used by people and corporations that are not Black has felt like the biggest theft for me lately. So I think language and how we speak is the thing that would be on my mirror.
Yeah, I agree with both of you thinking about the idea of recognition as constitutive of culture. And I think it's one of those, I think that is a way of talking about it that gets us sort of out of the really tough sort of like identifying conversations that we have where, you know, the second is you identify something as particular to one culture or another is like, that is the second where someone who would be perceived as outside of the culture is like, well, wait, we do that too. Mm-hmm. Or someone who would be assumed to be within the culture is like, yeah, I've never heard of that. I've never done that dance or whatever. Right. And so it seems like it's this, you know, impossibility of creating a sort of closed sense of culture, which, you know, it's because culture is not closed. It's like incredibly porous. And yet there is something very like recognizable, you know, if we were to think about something like appropriation, right? It's really, you know, it's the recognition of like, hey, I know where that thing, I recognize that thing, but it's appearing to me, you know, in a place or on a person that I'm, you know, I would not expect to encounter this thing, or, you know, it's not really manifesting quite the way it's supposed to, or something like that. But I think in my mirror, because like I don't want to avoid the question, which I think is a really good one. I think for me, I'm realizing how much like nostalgia really plays into my sense of culture that really means something to me. I think like that sort of for me, like what was like an adolescent sort of 2000s Bush era moment is just like was so formative of the music I like, of the TV shows I lean into, which doesn't even necessarily mean television that was like produced and airing at the time, but like a sense of like syndication, like what was in heavy rotation at the time, you know, seems to be really key to just like how I encounter, you know, new works of art and new culture, I guess, new cultural expression. And I think that's like been especially during the pandemic, where I think we're, you know, all sort of leaning towards our comfort objects. I'm just like, wow, like the 2000s are like, you know, even new stuff. I'm just like, if it has that sort of flavor or like aesthetic that feels like it's harkening back to like 15 years ago or whatever, I realize I'm like so inclined to over the stuff that maybe feels, you know, less familiar, or is maybe harking back to a sort of different time. And I mean, I'm thinking of music, but in general as well. So I guess my mirror is just like, I don't know, like Bush era everything, which is like frightening to think about.
This is the era of Bush redux, isn't that
something?
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting you bring that up too, though, right? Because there's also with how like porous, right, that you describe culture being. There is a like time period context for like a lot of those things, which is really interesting. And I think it's been really interesting, particularly with the internet being the internet, right? I remember I was reading one of your chapters in your book, and you talk about like Vine, for example, right? And how Vine was sort of this time capsule in which there was all this sort of culture making happening by Black creators, and then Vine was gone. And it was very much like if you missed it, you missed it kind of a thing, right? And so there's also this like temporality to culture sometimes that I think is really interesting. If you're thinking about culture being not only is it porous, but it can also be like disappearing as new culture is being created, which is wild to me.
Or is it like with, for instance, with Vine, because I loved Vine, it's like less of a disappearing and more of like things are constantly being absorbed by the next thing. Like you see the same kind of kids from Vine on TikTok, and then the same thing happens there in terms of things being, creative ideas being stolen and people not getting credit. And then you see the same sorts of things happening on other social media platforms. So it is this like bigger fish constantly eating the other fish. That's kind of in like culture getting bloated along the way.
Yeah, that's definitely, that's such a weird thing to like see over time, to like be able to track that over time too. But I think that's also, if to go back to like that mirror idea of culture, right? It's sort of like if someone messes up your mirror or someone else's hands are in your mirror, you're going to look for a way to like recognize yourself again, right? Mm-hmm. I think culture sort of, there's a way that maybe that culture kind of is always wanting to create its specificity so that it can recognize itself. But I guess I'm also wondering, like, this is maybe a boring question, but since all of us create culture or interact with culture in some ways, right? What are some of those markers that show up in your work, or sort of how do you navigate some of those cultural markers? I mean, I think for your book, Lauren, you're talking critically about a lot of different culture, right? And Tayarisha, you're almost creating a culture, right? In Selah and the Spades, right? You're creating this like insular space that has its own markers that are recognizable in it, that other people who aren't a part of it aren't going to know what the colors mean, or what this symbol means, or what have you. So how do some of those markers end up in how you guys create?
So one of the things I've been trying to work on moving forward is thinking about precision and the way that a term like Black, whether you choose to capitalize it or not, can actually evade the sorts of specificity that I'm trying to work towards in thinking about Black cultures, plural, or even the way sort of race shows up in mass culture and in literature. And I think like the past year also has been a sort of reminder of how, I don't know, about how sometimes that term can be used to avoid certain conversations. I mentioned, the capital letter, which a lot of people capitalize Black for political reasons. And I think that has been observed and now co-opted by spaces that don't maybe have that sort of political inclination. And so now we get this sort of fuzzy conflation between Black as racial, Black as cultural, Black as cultural in a Black American sense, or Black as cultural in terms of a regional sense. And without the sort of contextualizing work, or even just the sort of literacy around how to talk about race and culture, it's very easy for the sort of specificity of the situation or the context of the situation to really fall out. And so I've been trying in my work to think of naming something as Black as the beginning of the analysis and not the end of the analysis, as the thing to be like plumbed and worked within, rather than to say this is Black and sort of moving on with the next conversation. Does that answer what you said?
That was a great answer.
That was cool. I find it to be so important to the work that I create that I am almost like grossly divested from reality. I'm just not interested in recreating reality. I'm not interested in talking to reality. I'm not talking about reality. So like everything that I'm creating, I try to force myself out of reality as often as possible and as quickly as possible, because then I find that it's easier to center Blackness in my stories when I do that. And when I just assume that it is like, or when I center it and I find that it's like kind of threaded into everything because it's a part of this reality that doesn't exist. And so I kind of excuse myself from examining things that I feel like I would feel compelled to examine if I were writing something based in reality. And so everything that I write, I kind of have this like snow globe theory where these characters are existing inside of this like world of my head. And within that world of my head, there's like other little worlds within that world. And sometimes they intersect, but they're all within this snow globe. And it's weird. I think that I just do that because if I didn't, I wouldn't want to write as much as I do. I do treat writing as an escape from, not an escape, but writing as a way to understand all the stuff that I just don't understand on a day-to-day basis about the world in which we live. I think that a lot of the stuff that happens just doesn't make any fucking logical sense. Like, it doesn't make sense that, nothing makes sense in this world. At least to me, it just doesn't. It doesn't make sense. And I'm sick of trying to make logic out of things when at the end of the day, it's just like, oh, this gunman is racist and sexist, and that's it. Like, there's nothing else there. Like, that's what's going on. That is what's happening. Let's call it what it is. Let's not try to like make a story out of this, because that's the story. And I'm just really bored with that story. I feel like all my life I've been hearing that story. This happened because this person is racist. This happened because this person is Black and they hate Black, or this other person hates Black people. And it's just, I'm sick of that. And so I do try to, center Blackness in the story, in this fictional world, because it gives me permission to like dwell in the stuff that I like about it and not dwell in this need to make sense of white supremacy, because it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense. It's just hatred. And I'm trying to give my characters space to think about other things. Yeah, I don't know. That was a little bit convoluted, but I'm still trying to figure it out myself.
No, I think that makes a lot of sense. I think, I've even had conversations with other artist friends who are kind of in a similar train of thought to both of you, really, both asking, when we talk about Black, what kind of Black are we talking about? Like, what kind of specificity and precision are we lacking when we sort of use it as a placeholder for something else we're presuming the audience or whoever is going to latch on to? But I think the other part of that is that as this conversation about Blackness and social justice and activism are kind of running into each other, I think it's not uncommon, I think, to get pieces of art that are not as critically engaged with the conversation and sort of flattening how we talk about Blackness because it's a popular sort of thing to talk about, right? It's really easy. I think that was one of the things that I loved about Selah's character, right? Was that she was both Black, but not reacting like up against anything else. She was sort of her own singular person.
Her Blackness wasn't the problem. Her Blackness wasn't her antagonist. Like, her antagonist wasn't, like, she wasn't being kept from, or she never viewed her Blackness as holding her back from anything, because it wasn't. Yeah.
But I mean, it was really cool to see a high school age Black girl like that in a movie. I don't think I'd seen that particular interaction, right? I watched an interview that you did. You described it as savage formalism, I think.
Formalism.
Yeah. Which I thought was really interesting. You said it was sort of like a blend of like Rihanna's sort of visual persona, right? And her kind of sense of self, and this sort of construction that is unshakable.
Mm-hmm.
In the way that we see her move through the movie. That was really interesting. Yeah, I guess another question that I had for you, Lauren, definitely for both of you. We'll do for both of you. Only because I hate asking the question that's like, how do you interact with like the audience, right? Like I think culture is such a it's such a messy thing that we can still, it's like weirdly messy, but like you can also recognize it in really particular ways. And both of you are creating art in which the public is going to interact with it without you there, right? And so I think there's also that pressure, as much as artists of color, Black artists are kind of like negotiating that relationship with something like the white gaze or the public or whatever we're trying to, brush up against. I guess I'm wondering how much of that you guys think of with your own work.
Mm. That's a good question.
Yeah, I think I don't want to be like controversial. I don't know. I'm just like I'm always kind of skeptical of like, I'm kind of skeptical of like the writers that are just like, I'm not writing for white people, or I'm not doing this for white people, or I'm not doing this for the white gaze, or I don't even think about it at all, or I don't think about that at all. And I'm just like, sure. I don't know. It's just like, it always, because it's like, that's what like the author says, who's like publishing with like a big 5 publisher at like a book event at like the hot like Brooklyn bookstore. And I'm just like, it's okay to like admit that like you have a consciousness about an audience that like, is maybe not for whom the book is like, or the work is like dedicated. I think there's a difference between like, sort of inclining a work or dedicating a work to a certain audience, whether it's sort of racially identified or not. I think there's a difference between that and also like being cognizant of the fact that like, there's a potential for, or there is a sort of broader public that you're, writing towards or making yourself legible towards. I think for me though, also, and this is like another thing that I'm trying to work on, is the sense that, there's only so much that you can control as like an author, as far as like making things legible to whomever. So, even if you want to have that really sort of robust explanatory comma that makes sure that no one, or as far as you think, no one is being left out, there's always somebody who's going to interpret something a type of way. And that's like, I don't think that's necessarily an author's responsibility, And so, yeah, I mean, as far as like my own work, I mean, I think it does depend on the venue. I mean, the nice thing about, when you write for a certain outlet, it's like the question of who's the audience that you're writing towards is actually very straightforward. Who are you writing for? You're writing for the people that read this outlet. And so that means that certain editorial choices are going to be made with or without, your sort of enthusiasm for them, right? I think for, a book, it gets a little bit different because you get a little bit more leeway and sort of license to do what you do. And I don't make any other kind of art. So unfortunately, I don't have that much to say there. But also, you know, when you're writing for a scholarly venue, you know, who are you writing for? Again, it's like the people that read that journal or the people in your field. I don't know. I think it's like, it can be as like complicated or uncomplicated. I think actually, if a lot of people thought about it, like, I'm not sure if their audience is actually as like racially conscripted as maybe they think it is. Or I think it's just like a difference between like audience and like a sort of dedication, like I was saying earlier. I don't know. Because like people just really be saying like, this is only for the Black people. And then I'm like, go see it. And I'm just like, really? Because this is like pushing me out the door. So maybe not, you know, maybe it's for a specific kind of Black people. You know, it's like, I don't know. Whatever. I've been rambling. So I'll stop.
No, you said it though. Oh, yeah.
I love that.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't want to get caught in any traps ever with my work. So I just, you know, I can't write, like, I can't even say, oh, the stuff that I write it for Black people. It's like, I don't, because what does that mean? There's so many types of Black people. So like the idea of Black community, we all know that's a flattening. There's so many communities. There's so many, everything. So everything that I do, I try to be really specific and just write it for myself. Like Selah and the Spades, I was very clear with everybody from the very beginning. I am writing this for something that I wish 16-year-old Tayarisha could have watched. That's it. Because I'm a very specific type of Black person. Like, I grew up a very specific way with very specific parents because every individual person is specific. And so I find that when I do that, when I'm really just writing for myself and writing something that I'm going to laugh at and that I'm going to have a good time reading back, because I'm going to have to read it back more than anybody else is, or watching it back. Like, I'm going to do that more than anybody else. So I am writing for me, and I'm Black, as you can see, and as I talk about a lot. Like, I'm Black and I'm a woman and I love it. It's amazing. But when I wake up every morning, I'm not like, oh, Black woman. I'm like, no, Tayarisha, this is me. So even saying like, oh, I'm writing it for Black girls feels like a necessary flattening in order to market something, when I know in the back of my head, I'm writing this for like one specific Black girl, and that was me. Or I'm writing this for like one specific, I'm really like this story that I'm working on here, I'm writing it very specifically as something that I wish that I could have read when I was 23. Because I did a lot of stupid stuff when I was 23 that I wish I'd had an example of how to not do those things or how to learn from those things in a quicker way. And I find that when we're specific like that, naturally, a lot of people think that it's been written for them. And good, that's the point. Like, I think it was Barry Jenkins who said it in a way that I really remember, where he says that the specific is universal. It's true. I think that's so true. And that's like the one bit of advice that I am constantly repeating myself: be specific, just be specific and write it for you. Because the second that I find that I'm writing something for the larger community, because I only write fiction, I should say. So I think that like, I think my ideas would be different if I was writing nonfiction, but I don't do that. I like to lie, and this is the way that I get it all out, and doing it in my everyday life. Yeah, so, but the fiction, I gotta write for one person. That person may not always be me specifically. It's just that I'm the one that I know the best in the world. And so I can be really specific and really, like, I can stick the knife in at all the right places because I know it's where it's gonna hurt me specifically the most. And I do think that, that's also just, I don't know, that's also why I love Rihanna. I feel like she's somebody who just seems to live her life for her as opposed to for her fans or for the world at large and whatever we think she should be giving us. Her constant refusal of that is really inspiring to me. And it's a big part of why she inspired, Selah as a character. Yeah, specificity is what I'm about. And I think that then our identities will follow. And those who connect to those identities will also, again, feel like it was written for them.
Yeah, I'm only asking this because Steffan said someone wants me to answer this question too. But I think I really like the idea of dedication in terms of how you think about because I think be it by poetry or like journalism or essay writing or whatever, I go into it primarily, particularly journalism, to be honest with you, but my poetry as well. But I tend to go into it with a set of values before anything else, like this, like the principles that I'm dedicated to, the communities that I'm dedicated to, and wanting to prioritize, which feels like a different. It's like a slightly different. It's like adjacent to audience, or how we're talking about audience, because I think audience so quickly goes towards marketability. But it feels much more in line with how I approach my work, to say that there are definitely specific communities of people, specific times that I've lived in or something like that, or specific values that I want to prioritize or dedicate to in my work and make sure it's like communicated. Yeah, that's all. I don't want to answer my question. I want to answer asking y'all questions. The last question that I'll ask, if you don't mind, I guess this is kind of a large question. I'm so sorry. But kind of going off of that, one of the things that I've always really been interested by is kind of the argument that we tend to hear that Black people know white people better than white people know themselves, right? Because we've had to. In that same logic, do you think that there's a way in which your interactions with culture, your interactions with culture making or writing or what have you, producing, are sort of sharpened by the fact that you've had to be sort of hyper aware of the world that you live in? Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah, I think, I mean, it's like knowing another language in a way. I say this sometimes to some of my friends who are like people who I love in my life who are white. I say, there's all this stuff that you grew up with that I just know because I grew up in America as well, and it was shoved down my throat whether I wanted to know it or not. It's just around at all times, like movies and TV shows and like music and, I don't know, cultural figures. I just know them. But you don't know mine. Like, you don't know the Black people who are the same. You don't necessarily know the shows and the movies and the music and the people. You don't know them. And so then, unless you do the work to try to find them and seek them out, then you may not even ever interact with those things that were so important to me growing up. Whereas I know your childhood language for the most part. Like, I know so much of it and I've enjoyed a lot of it. And it doesn't feel like I'm, learning a different culture or anything. It's just like a fun story that I liked, or some good music that I love. We talk about, I'm sure you guys have seen, like, joking about how Black people love Paramore so much. But Paramore is good. Like, you love it because it's good. It's not like, oh, wow, this white rock band is really interesting. It's like, nah, Paramore fucking rocks. So, I think that does give you just, it's like learning, it's like knowing another language. Yeah, it's something that, again, because I grew up in America, and whether I like it or not, I'm American. It's just, I've been exposed to these things. And so I don't have to learn about them, and I have access to more. Like, I have access to multiple cultures and multiple communities and multiple figures that I can explore. And so I feel like it just makes everything fuller. And I feel like that's something that I'm very confused as to, God, this is a little spicy. I'm really confused as to like how white people don't get that. And it's like, I don't understand how to explain it other than that. But yeah, I do think that I think that's a real thing. And I think that it makes art that, again, is able to be really specific and is able to connect with all sorts of different people from all sorts of different cultures and communities, because that's just how you grew up. You grew up taking in all sorts of people and cultures and communities, whether you wanted to or not.
Yeah, I was going to say something similar. So I'll just sort of say that I mean, I probably wouldn't have said it like as nicely, but like I was also thinking about, you know, in terms of just like fluency and, you know, maybe not the best analogy, but like sort of the difference between, you know, growing up with a language and sort of acquiring it later. There's just like a depth of, I don't know, there's just like a depth there that is just like harder to, you know, just like acquire belatedly that we kind of just have to have from the onset. But I also think in terms of just curiosity, I think, you know, we maybe notice things and ask questions about things that are sort of taken for granted. I think about, you know, a novel like The House of the Seven Gables by Nathaniel Hawthorne. We have this chapter where this little kid comes into the shop and is like, wants a Jim Crow cookie, and he like gorges on the cookie, and then he comes back and he wants more, and you see like the residue of like, you know, his sticky fingers and like his mouth. And, you know, that novel was published in, you know, the mid 19th century. And it's like how many, you know, decades of literary criticism went by before someone was like, you know, so what is like the sort of racial implications of like this one, you know, appearance of like the, you know, Jim Crow cookie? You know, and it's like Nathaniel Hawthorne, like you think is of as just like the whitest of the white sort of American canon. And it's like, and yet, you know, there is like a, you know, a racial reading that is like ripe for critique here, and not even critique, but just like investigation. And now critics have just like overturned that like one very small part of this novel for like decades and decades now. But still, it's like someone has to ask the question. And I think oftentimes we are sometimes the one to like first ask the question, then notice like the Black person in the corner of the portrait and just be like, who's that? You know, and like, no, and it's just like no one else has ever asked the question.
Good point.
I like that.
Okay, thank you so much, Jacqui, Lauren, and Tayarisha. I loved all the work that you shared. Thank you so much for this great conversation and this community that you've given us online tonight. Thank you everyone in the chat and in the audience for joining us. Event 3 in our Black is Black Ain't series is next Thursday at 7:30. It's titled Liquid Stars, Translation, Digression, and Transformation. And it features the wonderful Cecilia Vicuña and Rosa Alcala. And they'll be talking translation in a new way and sharing their process, new work, and some rare footage. So that'll be really exciting. And then on April 14th, we have an event curated and moderated by poet Diana Coy Nguyen, which we're really excited about. And that will feature poet Lillian Yvonne Bertram, poet Natalie Diaz, and poet Lei T. Yim Thuy. We hope you'll join us for the entire series, and we'll see you then. Thanks again for joining.
Recalling guards cascading down, and heart and tenderness let free. You know the little gems that we hid in sheets for no one else to see. Don't you even miss me, dear? Don't you know I care? Don't you even know